Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hi, Swati.
Hi, Rukmini.
Hi, so the
Okay,
Hi.
I'll.
broadcast has started. Can everyone turn on their webcam?
Okay.
Am I
I'm not,
audible?
hi there, I'm not a speaker or anything, but I am an attendee, okay?
Okay.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi,
Hi, good to,
Kathleen.
hello, I'm looking forward to this. So I'm gonna, who's going to announce the people, the speakers? I think we had someone else doing it, didn't we?
Um, I believe not. At least I
I
wasn't
think it's just
told.
us.
It's just
Okay.
us. We can introduce ourselves, or you,
Yeah,
if you want to introduce us, you can do that
I'll
too,
just
Kathleen.
say
However.
welcome to it, but I won't moderate, okay? Because
Sure.
I may
Sure.
have to go in and out. How is that? All right.
Sure.
Let's see. Is this being done as part of a class?
No, this is open to all. It's not part of our classes.
Okay, it's a very pertinent. I hope you told them all to come.
Well, we did, yes.
So
Maybe,
can we start?
Sure, but aren't we early? Because I have quarter to two right now.
No, we actually moved it forward by half an hour and then back by 10 minutes. So we're actually late.
I
They were
didn't
trying to
see that.
set this up. So to all
Okay.
the participants out there, I just wanted to apologize. We're running a little late, but hopefully it'll be worth your while to have waited and we'll all learn something.
Okay, let's see. I'm sorry. I thought it was supposed to begin later. Good afternoon. I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists. And I'm Kathleen Madrowski speaking. I'm the Dean of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. And we have two very important members of the JSLH faculty, Professor Rukmini Pande and Professor Swati Chawla. Both of them have worked extensively in the area of digital humanities, and they will be able to answer your questions, but also give you an overview of what is considered one of the most critical areas. If you look up which are the subjects and the topics people should be conversant in, digital humanities is one of them. Many students, many people ask, well, what is this? What is digital humanities? I mean, it's been around for quite a while, but I think all of us would like to know more about it and how we can add meaning to our lives and our curriculums using this. So I will turn it over to you and to give a little bit more about your background, please, and then we'll begin the discussion.
Thank you so
Okay,
much,
Rukmini,
Kathleen.
yeah. Do you want to start?
Sure. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us. We are very sorry for the slight delay that we experienced, but I suppose that is also part of digital humanities. So I guess technical difficulties is something that we all work with and also study to an extent. Maybe it's all part of the plan. Um, so just to this is going to be a kind of introductory conversation about digital humanities. And I think one of the things that both Swati and I would like to discuss is our own paths towards it and our own kind of definitions of it. And the fact that there really is no one way of thinking about it or doing it, which is also part of why it's so exciting and accessible. At least that I think that should be the aim of it, to be both exciting and accessible to as many entry points as possible. So I guess the first kind of question that we could think about is, Swati, I'll ask you, um, what is digital humanities to you, the dreaded
Mhm.
question?
Yeah, Also, hi everybody again, and just wanted to repeat what Rukmini said. We are very thankful that you're here, and we're excited to talk to you all. Um, so, what is digital humanities? I always like to start this with what it's not, because we tend
Mm-hmm.
to think if we don't know about it, we think this is just a fancy way of presenting. So it's like a PowerPoint presentation which has a few more bells and whistles, but it's actually a way of doing humanities scholarship. So it's a new way with new tools to do scholarship. And if we ask us what does it mean to do scholarship and what does it mean to have new tools, I think a good entry point into it is to ask ourselves. So, for example, I'm a historian. Uh, and if I say, what is it to be doing his history uh, through DH? That's our acronym for digital humanities. And you can say, okay, if we break down doing research into three things: collecting material, processing material, and then presenting what we find. So the digital aspect of it could be on any of these three. So there could be
Mm-hmm.
materials that exist now in a digital format. So what's happening, say, with the digitization of archives or being able to run tests, OCR uh, on texts of 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 pages that would have taken
Mm-hmm.
us months to process earlier. So it's either our materials that are available in a digital format or the way we process them is using digital tools. So OCR
Mm-hmm.
is one tool. If we are working with maps, for example, being able to lay them on top of each other. So there are tools that can do that for us. So that's the second. And the third is, and which is what we commonly understand as digital humanities, is presenting it in a new format. So presenting it, say, in an ArcGIS format, or presenting it as a story with multimedia elements. And, that's something that's most familiar to us. But
Mm-hmm.
it encompasses all three: the data itself, the processing of it, and the presentation of it in humanities using digital tools. So that would be my rough, handy definition. What do you think, Rukmini?
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of thinking about it. And I think to add on to that for myself, it's also acknowledging that, that everything we do at the moment, and I know that some of my, some colleagues, when they talk about digital humanities, they feel like, again, as you said, they feel like they're not doing it, or they feel like there's something that is, beyond their scope or their abilities or their comfort
Mm-hmm.
with technology. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is, that's an entry point that also can be dismantled, because after all, we're all engaging with digital spaces, technologies, ideas,
Mm-hmm.
in a very everyday sense, and we cannot but
Mm-hmm.
be, I think, if we are people who work in the humanities, and if we are people who think about the humanities, then I think there's very few places where our teaching, our research, um,
Mm-hmm.
just our lives, doesn't intersect with
Mm-hmm.
those ideas. So it's an, I could teach a digital humanities class without, without actively, asking somebody to do something that they're not comfortable with in terms of technology, because it's understanding it, and understanding the kind of the underpinnings of, the structures. Why do we do things the way we do? Why do we pick the avatars in a video game? Why do we go online to talk to strangers? Those are questions that should be answered and should be asked, I think. So, and everybody does it,
Yes.
in any case. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think, what I would add on to, uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, your explanation of it. And that's pretty much why I do think of myself as a digital humanist, because that's how I came to it. So that's my the kind of viewpoint. Um, so I just wanted to talk a little bit, Swati, you talked about maps, right? And that's something that you, I think, work quite a lot with. So can you perhaps talk to us a little bit about why you think maps are so cool to work with, and what kind of stuff you do in your classroom?
Yeah. So first, in DH parlance, this would be geospatial digital
Mm-hmm.
humanities. And for those of you who want to look up more, the two big tools, ArcGIS is one, so it's ARCGIS, and ArcGIS Story Maps is particularly the tool that I have used extensively. And the second is Google Earth Pro. So how I got interested in this was I work on the Himalayan region in the 20th century. So I look at the Tibetan cultural region, which is Tibet, Sikkim, Bhutan, Ladakh, Tawang, parts of Nepal. And when I was doing my research at the archives, 20th century, as all of you know, is, India becomes independent, the People's Republic of China comes up on the other side. And these borders that we see on maps today that we take for granted actually were contested and negotiated and renegotiated and redrawn. And this actually came out of we would spend in my classes and also in my research a lot of time looking at historical maps, and it
Mm-hmm.
just occurred to me that when I teach courses on 20th century India, that students might be interested in looking at some maps together, and now we can
For
put
sure.
one on top of the other so we can superimpose them. And I thought it
Mm.
would be interesting to see how in any one region borders have changed in the last 100 years or so. So that's how I got interested. So first, because of the references to maps in the archives and looking at historical maps, and then some student interest. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was teaching at the University of Virginia, one of my students wrote in the feedback that I now realize that maps are not faxed from heaven,
Mm-hmm.
that maps are actually, and this is something we stress in history, that we don't say something has always been the case. We say
Absolutely.
it came to be because of historical processes, because of historical actors. So maps too are not facts from heaven. They are made right here on
Yes.
earth by historical actors. And I think looking at them, looking at historical maps and just saying, okay, if I'm from Sindh or from Bengal or I'm from Punjab, and just looking at, what was Punjab like under Maharaja Ranjit Singh? What was it like in the
Mm-hmm.
1940s, right before the partition?
Absolutely.
What was it like with the coming up of Haryana and the State Reorganization Act? So I think it just became a tool to understand historical processes in modern India, using this technology, because it's just so visible and palpable. We keep saying this was not always
Mm-hmm.
the case. We need to understand how it came to be. But I think just looking at that, it became evident. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the interactivity also is a big part of it, right? The fact that you can
Right.
actually uh work with material and kind of, annotate it, and as I've seen in your work, you kind of track journeys,
Hmm.
like historical journeys,
Hmm. Yeah. I believe I'm now able to show on my screen. Can you see my screen, Rukmini? Are you able to see my screen? Am I frozen? It appears that you are frozen. Sorry. I think I'll just stop showing screen. My
Yeah,
apologies. I
what
was
showed up.
coordinating.
Do
I'm
you
sorry.
hear
I
me?
was coordinating. Yes, Kathleen,
She's
go ahead.
frozen. Yeah, Rukmini is frozen. And the thing that came up on my screen from you was the announcement of the program.
Yes, and I was going to show a few more screens. So actually, let me go back to that. I'm sorry, you guys. Okay, I'm going to just show you my screen again and show you, 1 second. That was my first slide. I was just going to show you the kind of work we were doing in class. Okay. Kathleen, do you see ArcGIS map project on your screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I mean, just to quickly tell you the kind of work we do in our courses here at JSLH. So this is a course on the foundations of historical thinking. We call it the History Foundations 1, which our first year students do. And we look at through, in this course, the map of South Asia, which we come to in 3 modules, 3 out of 6 modules, as a palimpsest. So for those of you who don't know, a palimpsest is when something is written over again and again, but you still see all the layers under. So think of it as lasagna. You know, if you were eating lasagna and you sort of scooped it with a spoon, and all these different layers are still there, though at one point you only see the top. So we look at, that's how we approach a map. We approach it as a palimpsest, which has been written over again and again. And we try to show through historical maps, you know, how that has been the case. So this is the exercise, and I'll just show you like really quickly. Sorry, Rukmini, I think you got frozen for a few seconds, but now you're back. So here are some maps
Yes, yes, I did. I
of
am back.
some
Yes.
ways
Apologies.
of, that's okay. Some ways of imagining India. This is from calendar art in the early part of the 20th century, imagining India in the figure of a woman. So we use these and the current political maps, and we try and see how was India imagined. And this is just a screenshot from a student's project who worked on the state of Mysore, you know, which was part of, it was a kingdom, and then became part of the Andhra state after the State Reorganization Act. So this is how it looks like on the story maps. And this is the second project, which is a Google Earth project in my course on Tibetans in India, where we, as Rukmini was saying, we look at the journeys of people who are refugees or who are monastics, monks and nuns, who've lived at different places. And when they were coming in from what is Tibet to what is India, in some of their minds, they weren't traversing an international border. So the cartography or the imagination of space that exists in their minds, that's there in their interviews, is not the same as the political map that you see today. So this is what students do. They first work with a physical map, and they map rivers and mountains, pilgrimage sites, cities, bazaars, and then they map the journey of a person using Google Earth and you know, annotate different spaces on that journey. So this is just you know, just a small example of the kind of work that I've been doing in my classes. I'm going to stop sharing screen now, so hopefully you can see me back, and Rukmini is back too. So thank you, and I'm sorry if that took too long.
No, no, I think that was very cool to see, you know, especially how stuff, you know, I think part of the excitement of doing digital humanities is to be able to use tools to see patterns that we didn't before, or if we did see them, to see them in a new way. And that, you know, makes stuff just, history is never history is never dead, of course, but it makes it come alive, I think, for students in a way, that just brings a new dimension into the classroom, which is why it's so cool to be able to do. um, so I guess, um, for
You want to
myself,
tell us about your
my
courses?
some of
Yes.
my work.
Yeah, both your
Yes,
research
yes.
and your teaching. Yes.
Yes, so my research is works on on communities online and
Mm-hmm.
identity and community online, basically, and how can we think of these ideas that have been around again for a really long time. How do people connect? How do people not connect? How does ideas like conflict, etc., how does that work out in an online space? And my particular
Mhm.
research was on fan communities and and of course it came from my own experiences online and how I found how I found I am a geek, and how does that make it how does that interface with my life and my use of technology and the decisions I make,
Mhm.
and that moved on to a research based project which ended up in a PhD and a book. And I think what really encouraged me to keep going was the fact that these are things that we interface with every day. Like, how do we
Mhm.
talk about popular culture? How do we
Mhm.
how do we love it? How do we hate it? And how do these interactions, once again, what is the difference between sitting in an empty theater or in a full theater? Well, of course, that feels like very far away now. But what
Yeah.
is the difference of watching a thing on one's own, and what does it mean to talk to somebody about it? And how does it what does it mean for fans to interface across cultural boundaries? um, so there's a lot of ways in which to expand that work onto what happens in terms of um what can I say? What happens to somebody when you are in a community that you can't see, or if you do see it, you're interfacing with them without your kind of offline lives. So the connection between online life and offline life is something that I
Mhm.
think is very pertinent to us all.
Mhm.
And my work tries to break down that division or that assumed division. And I find that to be really interesting with my students because a lot of them interface with digital life in a way that even I don't. So I
Yeah.
think it's very interesting to use that connection and try to get them to think about, just stuff that happens to them all the time. So if they're reacting to a meme, why is that? Like, where does what's the history of that kind of interaction? How can we use that to think about literature or
Mhm.
culture or any
Mhm.
type of that uh, aspect. So my own course is I have a course on cybercultures, and that's very much what we try to do there. We just had a very interesting lecture on caste and media, for instance, and we talked about how we continue to engage with these very embedded systems in our
Mhm.
society, and how it becomes both education, it becomes a point of how do we learn about these things. So
Mhm.
yeah, for me, I think digital humanities is about giving students the tools to understand technology, not just in
Mhm.
terms of data, not just in terms of how does it work, but also why does it work. And we must think about these things more and more, I feel, because of the way that data, etc., mediates our lives.
Mhm.
We are data, right? So we should know
Mhm.
what people are doing with it. And I think very often those conversations become very interesting in class because then we feel like that's not
Mhm.
part of you know uh, I think sometimes we feel ourselves are passive, or we are just one, we're a million different data points. So what does it matter what we do online? So
Mhm.
again, I think talking about these things, especially today, right? We are now more and more of our lives are being connected. More of surveillance is happening. who is online matters, how their online matters. So I think these questions are going to become, they already are, and I think they're going to become even more pertinent as we go on.
So you started working on, I mean, I remember Professor Rukmini and I overlapped in our master's and MPhil here in Delhi before we went abroad. And I remember you started this project, around, in your MPhil, I believe. So it's now, I mean, that's been now some time away, and smartphones were just coming
Yes.
in at that time. Now, of course, the way we interface with technology has completely changed, with the phone and with the watch, with GPS trackers, new tools of surveillance, facial recognition, eye recognition, and all of now fingerprinting on the phone. So, how do you,
Absolutely.
how often, as a practitioner and as a teacher, do you feel like you have to retool? And how does that learning from students happen? Because, as you said, they are interfacing with technology in very different ways than we are.
Yes, true. I do find it really interesting that I mean, I learn a lot from my students all the time, because again, but I find it very interesting that I think because for a lot of them, because they're so embedded in it, because, I think both of us went through a time when, it was more difficult
Mhm,
to engage. Like I remember the first time dial-up came, and that was very
mhm.
exciting.
And
So
more
I think
expensive.
that
It was more
when you're
expensive.
embedded in something, it makes it and much more expensive. Absolutely,
Mhm,
absolutely. So once you're embedded in it, you tend to also not think about it in a way
mhm,
that like you're like, this happens, or one of the things I do enough in my first kind of class is always ask them what is the thing that they use, what are the apps that they use, what are what is the kind of stuff that they do all the time without thinking, and then we kind of
mhm,
track that. For a gate pass you need, you need an app, to get on the bus you need an app, and that kind of, I think it's the awareness of it, and as far as retooling goes, again, how can I be better about also understanding, what technologies are accessible and what are not, not also thinking that everyone is as comfortable, um,
mhm,
with something,
mhm,
is also part of the learning process,
mhm,
and so I think the glitches are as important as anything
mhm,
else,
mhm,
the problems that come up, how we solve them,
mhm,
that I think, and also, dealing with those also makes you think as a teacher,
mhm, mhm,
more than, let's walk in and I'm going to talk about, something that's just, it is a text and it doesn't move and change. I think that, is, it kind of lets you be a little more perhaps comfortable. I'm not
mhm,
sure. Something that,
mhm,
at least it's a different, I think it's a different relationship. Let's just say.
mhm,
So
mhm,
that to me is, I'm constantly having to predict stuff and work around stuff and read stuff, use different examples from different media just because things change so fast. So something that
mhm.
worked really well 2 years ago, the reference isn't there
Right,
anymore. So
right.
that's, so I think again, technology as lived experience, I think is part
Mhm,
of what I try to
mhm,
highlight.
mhm,
um,
mhm,
I mean, so do you, of course, but
mhm.
in a slightly
Yeah.
different way, I think.
And I was thinking too that, both of us, we were trained, I mean, at first, and that was, I think you stayed with literary studies, and then, you did some DH, and now you're teaching in a humanities department. I was also trained in literary studies and then in history. And then I held a fellowship in digital humanities. And now that
Hmm.
we are in JSLH, so we are not in a discipline specific department, we are in a humanities department. where in the nature of things we do,
Yes.
it's interdisciplinary, but it also, I think our program very rigorously demands of us to go back to the drawing board and keep thinking, what does it mean to be doing humanities in the contemporary moment? So I was also thinking, when students come into our courses, and they
Absolutely.
come from very siloed, siloed disciplines. I'm coming in to do, X, Y, Z, and we try to say, well, yes, I mean, you might want to major in economics or in psychology, but you still have to do this large breadth of courses. And I think
Absolutely.
DH sort of again forces us to break out of
Yes.
disciplinary silos, and also from technological silos. So it's not just, say, about coding, or it's not about one
Yes.
tool.
Yes.
It's I was wondering, what do you think as a teacher? Is this a hard sell, or are students receptive to it? What has your experience been like? Because we're often not open to critically
Uh,
looking at how we behave, and technology now is also so much more intimate. What photos am
oh,
I
absolutely.
clicking? Where am I spending time? How do I,
Absolutely.
where do I feel comfortable giving up some of my privacy? For free Wi-Fi, will I do that at the airport? For free Wi-Fi, will I put in my
Yeah.
phone
Yeah.
number? Or how am I
Absolutely.
behaving as a fan, as a troll? As a person who
Absolutely.
calls out trolls. So, how has it been like teaching at JSLH?
I think it is difficult for anyone, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
just students, but anyone to really examine any of their practices. And I think that that's, I mean, I enjoy it, but it is also, I think, it is challenging because the other part of it is that we think we know,
Right.
so so I think some
Yeah,
of
I
my
know about
students when they come in,
Facebook. I know how
exactly,
Facebook works. I've been on it for
exactly.
a decade.
Absolutely. I know what Facebook works. I know what they're tracking. I know that they're trying to target me with ads. I'm not going to be, swayed by that. I'm smart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the other thing that, you know, again, even, and I include, teachers, I include practitioners, I include students. Um, there is a level of, well, we know what's happening and we know how these technologies work because we are so familiar with them. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
breaking through that, and also breaking through our own privileges, within that, is
Mm-hmm.
something that DH must be better about. And I think that is, I mean, I try to do it in my courses a lot. I think a lot of kids sometimes come into my class thinking we're going to be talking about, uh, you know, uh, just kind of tech based things, but I try to break that down and be like, well, like for the first class in my thing today, I talked about Kashmir, and how there's the lack of internet and the lack of access is as much a part
Mm-hmm.
of DH as anything, as anything that we do online.
Mm-hmm.
The absence is as important to think about as the presence. And so that's, I think, something that DH must in India, is, I think, that's a particular focus. I don't know whether you would have thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. And I think also issues of censorship. So I think
Mm-hmm.
cutting off internet is one, it's on the more egregious end of it. But also, I see, for example, with Tibetan refugees in South Asia trying to communicate with their relatives back in Tibet. And there was a
Absolutely.
conversation in the exile community a few years ago about platforms like WeChat, and how
Hmm.
safe they were. And again, how vulnerable or otherwise to censorship or snooping, or surveillance these platforms are. And also the question of language. What is the language in which we interact online?
Absolutely.
So I
Absolutely.
think language, both in terms of coding and not coding, like that's one part of the debate within the field. And are you a
Yep.
practitioner if you don't code?
Yep.
And, I mean, is it a field that's going to be
Yes.
open to those who have
Yes.
those tools? Or can those of us with a humanities training in literature or history be also DH practitioners? So that's one part of it. But also just, how we commonly understand language. So Tibetans within Tibet no longer learn Tibetan. And those
Hmm.
who are coming in now, they only know Mandarin.
Right.
So
I
what
see.
is the language? And, is it possible now if you can speak Tibetan, but you can't recognize the alphabet or write it?
Mm.
What does, voice to text do, for example? So I think some of these, and, both of us stress this both in our work and in our classes, tools are not value neutral. That
Absolutely.
tools also are produced. I mean, even if it's a simple tool like a pen or paper, that too is not value neutral.
Absolutely.
For much of history, communities were excluded from holding pen and paper and reading a physical book. So from there to now, with smartphones, with coding, and with all of these
Mm.
amazing tools that we are using, mapping, who has access to these tools, and
Absolutely.
who is just the user of it, who is the creator of it, what is that loop like,
Yep.
what can you opt in and opt out of? Can you opt out of Facebook? Are you
Yep.
really opting into everything that you think you're opting
Yes.
into?
Yes.
Is data
Yes.
ever deleted? Is data property? I think some of these questions, and some are also new questions, and some have always been there,
True.
but some are new. Like, what is Uber
Some are new.
doing, with my data?
Hmm.
And I think I think that's where the strength of a humanities training lies, as opposed to a disciplinarily siloed training, because it's a little agnostic about what it considers to be worthy of studying, and therein lies its strength. So all of these, I mean, one of
Yeah.
our colleagues
Yeah.
works
That's
on
for sure.
WhatsApp, and what does WhatsApp do in elections, for example? So all of these are important things, and all of these can be subjected to a critical gaze using the tools of humanities. And DH is, it's one part of that toolkit. Um,
Yep.
I also wanted to say, you guys, if you have any questions,
For
please
sure.
type them into the chat. Uh, and
Yes.
yeah, so we're going to just pause for a few seconds and catch our
Yes.
breath and maybe take a sip of water. And till then, you can type in your
Yes.
questions, or if you're able to speak up, do. And Dean Kathleen, if you're still there, if you had questions or comments, or just wanted to say something more about the work we do at JSLH, please feel free to jump in.
Sure. Do you want a couple of 1 minute break to drink your water?
Please go ahead.
Sorry, I get very thirsty because I talk too much. But yeah, please, anyone can go ahead. And I'm constantly looking also at the chat window. So if someone types something in, I'll read it out.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question about digital humanities. So as far as I'm understanding it, on one hand, a big issue is disparity. I mean,
Mhm,
who has the tools, who has the right to use the tools. So even
mhm,
in our own classrooms, I've noticed, especially during the lockdown, there are some
mhm,
people who just cannot participate, okay?
Hmm.
And the only way
mhm,
they can participate is through a text. You know,
mhm,
they cannot receive something on the screen because they might be
mhm,
using a phone and they might not be using a smartphone. So
mhm,
it's a big question too. How do you get over this? And I'm thinking not just in the classroom, but in the communities as well, because there are very interesting projects that can be used using digital humanities, connecting people
mhm,
in villages,
mhm,
showing roads that cut through, different
mhm,
showing water sources, things like that.
mhm,
But what if people don't
mhm,
have the tools? Then what do you do?
mhm, mhm. Okay, we'll take that. And there's also one more question from Mridul. What is digital humanities? So maybe either Mridul, you joined in a little late, or perhaps the definition I gave wasn't very clear. So maybe Professor Rukmini, they can take a stab at also defining it and take Dean Kathleen's question, and then I can add on to the question.
Uh, well, I think, yeah, that I think digital humanities again is a matter of looking at traditional, let's say what we would think of traditional humanities in terms of English, in terms of sociology, history, philosophy, right? Things that we tend to think of as perhaps traditions of learning that we have engaged with for decades, for centuries. And digital, to add on digital to that, means basically to be able to engage with that content in a way that is facilitated in some way by technology, right? Or talks about the way that technology already interacts with those disciplines. So it is, it can be some, as Professor Swati has been talking about, it can be taking digital tools and applying them to material, to data, to archives, to text, to look at a literature text and be like, how many times has this word been used, or how many, what are the words that are coming up most often, or is there a pattern in speech that we can look at. It may be archiving something, it may be taking something that has been in only physical form and put it into a digital form, and just for access, right, for stuff that it has been locked up in a library somewhere, and now that it's on your digital space, can be accessed by people who cannot, for instance, travel, or who cannot cannot go to that space because of expense. Or it could be, what is TikTok? Why does it work? Why are we so hooked onto that next thing that's coming up on our feed? So all of those things are questions that pertain to digital humanities, and so that's why it's such a broad ranging field, and that's why it allows so many entry points, and that's why I think it's exciting. And in terms of, I think that's a great question about access, and about the fact that we have to keep thinking about access. So it's not just about okay, if everyone is in the class or in this space, in this webinar space, can everybody engage? And I think that is a conversation that has to be taken from a larger attempt to rethink education and rethink access. So it may be building in stuff like pauses for to let somebody drink some water, and take a breath. It may be facilitating it may be facilitating another mode of engaging with material. The good thing about digital technologies is that it allows us to come back. It allows us to lengthen the time that if in a traditional classroom I have an hour, but in a digital classroom I could build in time for people to think about a question and come back to me, maybe over a period of a couple of days, and that can be brought into a live space like this. um, so it's it's thinking, rethinking, and also not assuming that everyone in a space is homogeneous. I think that's also very important, because there's a great thing of there's a great, I think, tendency to think of that once you are in a digital space you're all equal, which is also not true. So I think that's something that I keep trying to go back to and trying to help my students think through as well. That there's plenty of stuff happening in digital spaces that it's not that everything happening in digital spaces is quote unquote elite, or quote unquote not connected to very vital questions of activism, of identity, of belief, of democracy, of all of those things.
Hmm. I think to add to that, and thank you for laying that out so in such detail, Rukmini. I think some of the questions we ask, even in a quote unquote regular classroom, of being, is this classroom ableist, or is this curriculum
Absolutely.
ableist? Is it um, is it sensitive to minorities, whether it's religious minorities, sexual minorities? Is it sensitive to the kind of inequities that exist in our society? So it's some of those questions extended now in the digital format.
Oh, for sure.
I think it's bringing in that awareness of inclusion. So when we
Mm-hmm.
sit down and we write our course outlines, and at JSLH we have this culture of designing our courses together, at least our foundational courses, where some of these questions come up. And I think again for me, the break we got in March to again go back and retool and imagine how
Mm-hmm.
these courses would look in the digital format, in the online format, I think was that opportunity to first acknowledge that every technology, and again, that includes a physical space, stairs. Can people climb the stairs? Maybe not, and we need elevators. Or for some
Mm-hmm.
students, we need, if it's a small class, maybe we need the class to be on the ground floor. So just
Yep.
extending that into this format. So things like recording our lectures, having an element of asynchronous learning. But I also wanted to say in my elective, which is a small class of just over a dozen students, there is one student, who I see is thriving in this format because he has crippling social anxiety. And this format actually helps him to open up. So
Mm-hmm.
I was noticing in our first couple of interactions, he was speaking up more. He wouldn't want to turn his camera on, but he would speak up more. And just last week, he stayed till the end of the class, and after everybody had left, turned his camera on, and he said, "Professor, this format works very well for me." So I think it's
Right.
also being sensitive to that, to not, not assuming it either way, and also again to keep acknowledging, just let me know, again stopping, pausing, listening,
Right.
acknowledging, this is not the same experience that you signed up for in the beginning of the semester. Some things have changed.
Yes.
And learning like this too is, I mean, in the scheme of things, it's also a data point, and it's giving us the opportunity to learn, what is it like to be living in the middle of a pandemic. The historians in JGU, and I'm part of the historians group, it's called the Center for
Mm-hmm.
Research in History. We just started this project called The Pandemic Will Be Archived, where we are
Right.
crowdsourcing from the JGU community, again, images and texts and memes and legal or paralegal information that is thrown at us, and
Yes.
archiving it. And then, we've already started talking about like where to store it, what tools would be used to process it. So I think once, and this is what I think the humanities training does, that bug that
Mm-hmm.
once it enters your head, it
Yeah.
sort of colors the way you look at all of these other things. So I think if we are committed to creating inclusive classrooms, then it's relatively easy for that commitment to extend to delivering our classes in this new format, because we've already established that commitment, and perhaps students trust us, and they're able to come up to us, as I'm sure they're able to
Mm-hmm.
come to Kathleen and even say, I'm sorry, I don't have access, I don't have a private room, or I have to take care of chores, I'm a caregiver. So I think to have that relationship already, in the culture, it
Yeah, for
facilitates
sure.
these conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we can't take offline. We can't, as I said, at one point I said you can't create these divisions between offline and online spaces. You can't, it doesn't work. And I think that's
Yes.
again what digital humanities tries to do as well, like break down those barriers. I can see that somebody says, I can make
Yeah,
a
there are a
career
few
out of
more
promoting,
questions.
yeah, promoting ministers during elections. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there are all kinds of new possibilities when it comes to the way that employment opportunities, and understanding those opportunities. Again, I think what a humanities education in any case, and a digital humanities education, is to help you understand what, the structures behind any tool that you're going to use. And I think that's really what, so even if I had a student who came in from the law school, and after finishing the last time I ran my digital humanities course, and then wrote to me two years later, being like, ma'am, I'm doing stuff in cyber security, and it was your course was what got me thinking about it. So it's about what can you, how do you think about these things? And I think once you start thinking of yourself as a kind of an active participant, I think that's the most important uh, aspect for me in this kind of education that we do. And I think,
And that's a good
so yeah,
segue into this other question about are you consuming the social media app or the product advertised by social media? And that's a very good question. And
absolutely. Or are you the product being
or are
consumed?
you the product? Yes,
you know,
yes.
because that's
Uh,
usually what
or
happens.
yeah, it's some other company buying your data, like buying your
Exactly.
preferences. Like, are you the product? That's a good question, and I would again, encourage you to see. But it's free Wi-Fi, really free.
Hmm.
The information that you're giving out, whether it's your age or gender or how often you travel. Um, are you traveling alone? Are you traveling for work? And how that is aggregated. Uh,
Absolutely.
and so is it, so when I'm trying to save $5 at an airport abroad because I can't hotspot with my phone, and I, instead of paying that money, I give this data, why is it financially viable for a company to be providing me free Wi-Fi? It's the same with social media. Is Facebook really free?
Hmm.
um, is Instagram really free? So we are not going to answer that for you, and that's what we don't do that in humanities classrooms. We don't answer questions like these, but maybe we could just tell you how to think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And just Rukmini, do you want to add a few more questions that can help her think through this?
I think it's just, I think the question is very, once we start thinking about what is the product, right? And also we start thinking about how these transactional exchanges then come to mediate not just what we're doing, but also how we perceive ourselves, is, I think also a key part of any question in a digital humanities space. Because, yes, at one point, even why should I have to make the decision between $5 and giving part of my my personal data up? That's also a larger question to be asked in terms of data control, and what is our
Yes.
right to our data.
And is
And
Wi-Fi part of the commons or is it not?
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, is it, that's a key question that's being talked about in, in our courts. Is access to Wi-Fi a fundamental right? Is access to the internet a fundamental right? And more, it seems that yes, it is. If I have a right to education and I cannot access education in any other way except online, then does the government have the responsibility to supply me with that? And that is something, again, that's not an elite question. It's not, it's not a question to be floating around. It's a question that mediates people's lives in a very direct way. So again, I think that's, we have to ask these questions. We have to believe in them. And I think we have to push back against this idea that, that these aren't uh, very vital questions for a lot of people. and that they're already participating in these spaces. It's just that, our own ideas of, oh, who's online. I mean, I think that's an important thing to talk about as well. Who is online? And not just assume that we know. So I think that's what I'd say. Maybe we would, yeah, I think we're
So maybe
heading up.
we have about 5 minutes,
Yeah.
maybe more,
Yeah.
because we started a little late. So any more questions?
We've
Anything else?
been
Any
blabbering on for a while.
suggestions? Yeah, for future webinars you want us to do, or anything else that you want to know? I
Yes,
have
please
one more
feel free
slide.
to.
Yeah, please.
No, no.
I
I
had
will
one
please
more
feel free
slide
to
at
get
the
in touch.
end. Yeah, but yeah.
Sorry, we are overlapping.
So Rukmini was saying, feel free to get in touch. I want to echo that. And maybe I'll just also show you, if you're interested to, read more, I'll just show you one more slide, sorry, this is not always seamless. 1 second. Okay, can you see the slide? Rukmini, can you
Yes.
see it? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yes, I can.
So this is just it's Professor Pande's book that's here, and also this from UCLA, Miriam Posner. How did they make that from a DH bootcamp? Very handy introduction to what digital humanities is, and it takes you through a few different kinds of projects, all student projects, almost all, I think, undergrad projects. So check that out. Also, if you want to know about what's happening in digital humanities in India and in the classrooms, there was a conference I participated in, which was India's first ever Twitter conference on DH by the Digital Humanities Alliance for Research and Teaching Innovations, called Dharti. So we have all the conference tweets here on this WordPress. You could just also Google Dharti Twitter conference, and that should show up. So these are just a couple of resources to get your hands wet and read a little more. And of course, you could also write to us if you have any
Yes,
questions.
write to us. There's a lot of stuff that will be, I think, also because of our current world, I think there will be more opportunities, so feel free to, get in touch, ask for more targeted, things that you would like us to talk about. This is, of course, a very introductory thing, but, to help you get interested in what we do at JSLH, and, what the possibilities are for your own work. So do get in touch. Where we are available online. There's plenty of ways to think about this, and of course, Professor Swati has also been very great in supplying these particular resources as well. So even as undergraduates, what can you do? A lot, right? So that's something that I think will be, I think, continuing to, I mean, you will be engaging with it in one way or the other in your undergraduate lives. So
yeah, I mean,
I
you're
think
in
that,
it, you're in the matrix. So, you
yes.
might as well be enlightened and critical about it than just be passive. You are in it
Sure.
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. All right. So
Kathleen, did you have anything else? Any final thoughts before?
Yes, I did. First of all, thank you. Thank you so much for your, very interesting talk. And I consider it almost the beginning of a talk because I think in planting these ideas, you give us so many more ideas. So who should people write to? Because I think that there is in an open forum, room for many specific questions. But should they write to you, Swati, you, Rukmini, either of you, so that we can know what we should do with the next one?
either of
And
us,
then,
we're online on the website, our JSLH
We're also
website.
on Twitter, by the way.
We're also
Sorry, I
on
know
Twitter.
the book people of today are all on Instagram and TikTok and Snap. I don't know if anyone's on Snapchat anymore, But Twitter is where a lot of the academic conversations still happen and conversations around pedagogy. So we are both there. I have a handle called Himalayan Histories, where I share stuff from my archives, including DH work on the Himalayas. Rukmini shares a lot about fan cultures and fandom, postcolonialism, creating inclusive digital spaces. So if you want, Twitter is another space where you could be following some of these handles, and we are both there. So yeah, just look us up, and of course, email works fine as well.
And of course, where our email is very much available. So, please feel free to get in touch and think about what else you would like to do.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think that one thing that may interest people is the archives, pandemic archives. So once that is up and running, because I'm not sure if it's up and running right now.
Not yet. We are still putting it together. Yes, but if you're interested in contributing, just shoot me an email and I'll add you to the list.
Okay, and Rukmini, do you have any resources or any space where you would receive information besides questions going to you personally? But is there anything you're looking for from people?
At the moment, of course, I'm just, I'm still looking at how Indian fan cultures are evolving, and that's something that is, still in the process, of course. It is a new project I'm thinking about, but it is, of course, things have been kind of delayed a little bit. Swati, of course, has, is looking at something that's happening right now, but mine is also interesting how things are curving around, this presence in, other things are curving around the pandemic, basically. So I think that's something that at the moment I'm still thinking about how to engage with that in terms of these other ideas.
Thank you. I want to know, Yugank, are you on with us or not? Yugank was trying to get in, and I was just going to let him speak for 1 minute about the Jindal Fellowship Program, in which digital humanities talking about it will be something that we'll be talking about. So if any of you are, looking for something very important to do after graduation, there's a 1-year program in which we will touch upon in a much deeper way digital humanities and advanced research methods. So you can find it on the JSLH website as well. Okay, thank you both very much, and thank you everyone who participated.
Thank you everyone so much for coming and joining us.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Swati, I'm going to call you in a minute.